Afternoon, but again, those snow showers building up across western Scotland. We could see a few centimetres even at low levels by the end of Sunday. Certainly a lot more than that over some of the higher routes. A cold feel across the north, double digits in the south, but everywhere that wind will make it feel colder.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Alastair Stewart. Coming up on the programme, more letters calling for a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister and another resignation. But what did the South End West by-election tell us about what ordinary folk feel? Is the Chancellor easing or adding to the cost of living crisis? And a top-level disagreement about pay, the PM versus the Governor of the Bank of England. And the Winter Olympics open in China amid grave concerns about freedoms. Should the athletes even be there? All of that coming up, but first a news update with Polly Middlehurst.
Alistair, thank you. The headlines, as you've been hearing, the Conservative MP Aaron Bell has become the latest to submit a letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister. He said he struggled to reconcile assurances Boris Johnson had given him about the Sue Gray report, and that the gatherings held at number 10 Downing Street made the Prime Minister's position untenable. It's reported up to 17 MPs have now submitted letters, but 54 are needed to trigger a vote of no confidence. Meanwhile, Downing Street says the departure of the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Principal Private Secretary and Director of Communications had been agreed beforehand. Boris Johnson has reportedly told Downing Street staff that change is good. It comes after reports a fifth advisor, Elena Narazansky, resigned just hours after the other three handed in their notice. Policy Chief Munira Mirza also resigned yesterday. She cited Mr Johnson's refusal to withdraw his claim that Sir Keir Starmer had failed to properly prosecute Jimmy Savile when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. 7 men have been jailed after a plot to sell on an array of lethal weapons was disrupted by the National Crime Agency. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has this report.
This is the moment the law finally caught up with Umar Zaire, a Manchester drugs dealer who bought deadly firearms to enforce his criminal trade. Also arrested by the National Crime Agency, another member of the gang, Bilal Khan.
innocently.
Protesting his innocence, but this is Bilal Khan just days earlier, his head deliberately obscured, posing with an AK-47 he'd just bought. Zaire clutched the same weapon, showing off in another picture. As well as AK-47 assault rifles, Scorpion and Uzi machine guns, handguns and ammunition were all up for sale on an encrypted online site used by criminals across the globe. Robert Brazendale, who helped supply the weapons, was arrested after he fled to Malaga in Spain. In total, 7 organised criminals, including drug dealers and gun runners, have now been sentenced to a combined 81 years in jail. Mark White, GB News.
And just lastly, new pictures show the Queen's beloved dog Candy rudely interrupting a photo shoot as Her Majesty read cards from well-wishers ahead of her 70th Jubilee. It's a dorgie, a cross between a corgi and a dachshund, joined Her Majesty at Windsor Castle amid a display of memorabilia from the Golden and Platinum Jubilees. Candy apparently made a lap of the room and greeted members of the press. Royal Zoomies, why not? TV, online and on radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. Now more from Alastair.
Polly, thank you very much indeed. The crisis at the heart of government is being played out on television, radio and across the newspapers. It finds its echo in the opinion polls. Meltdown and exodus, they all cry. The game is up. Like the last days of Rome, says one television programme. No, that was much more fun, replies one minister. In the midst of all of this, there was a by-election yesterday in Southend West, caused by the tragic killing of Sir David Amess. As an act of respect, neither Labour nor the Liberal Democrats stood. But other fringe parties did field candidates, who voters were as free to support as they were the Tory candidate. Now, normally, by-elections are an opportunity for ordinary folk to demonstrate their anger, their concern, their sense of resignation or their outright fury. What's more, in the context of a parliamentary majority still approaching 80, they can do it without toppling the government. And many of them elected that government in 2019. So, what actually happened? Turnout in Southend was 24%, one of the lowest for a Westminster by-election since World War II. The number of spoilt ballot papers rose to more than 1,000. That's about 7% of the 14,858 votes cast, and higher than many of the minority candidates attracted. In the early hours of this morning, the Conservative candidate Anna Firth was duly elected with 12,792 votes, an 86.1 share. Jason Pyle of the psychedelic movement was second with 512 votes, and Steve Laws for UKIP was third with 400. Now, you could argue the circumstances were such that it isn't indicative of what's going on nationally. But it just struck me that the fury and resignation over Boris Johnson's premiership might, even should, have seen a slightly different outcome. I'd have expected a much bigger protest vote, either for other candidates or through even more spoilt ballots. But that didn't happen. Add to the fury at what went on in Number 10 and the subsequent denials of parties, cover-ups, contradictions and all the rest of it, the bleak economic news that unfolded on polling day, energy prices, confirmation that national insurance would rise, it would go ahead, and that interest rates rose and will rise even further towards inflation, hurtling towards 7%. Well, if ever people were going to press their fury home democratically, yesterday was the day. And a by-election was the perfect vehicle to do it. Might it just be that the fury is slightly over-gilded by those with a vested interest in promoting it? When the resignation of Munira Mirza broke, all hell broke loose with it. It's a long-standing ally of the Prime Minister. His brain, some even said. But one tweet caught my eye. I quote, "It's all very fishy. Her husband works for Sunak. James Forsyth, who broke the story, was at Winchester College with Sunak, who was best man at his wedding to Allegra Stratton." She's the PM's former communications director who resigned over that infamous press conference rehearsal. The tweet went on. Further Spectator connections include Mary Wakefield, Dominic Cummings' wife. Now, I'm not usually a conspiracy theorist, ... Fascinating little read. In the newspapers, there's much about Operation Rishi having been launched. The man himself took the opportunity to distance himself from the Prime Minister by saying of Johnson's charge against Starmer over Jimmy Savile, "I wouldn't have said it." He subsequently declared his loyalty and support for the Prime Minister, but it does seem the game's afoot. Should 54 and more Tory MPs call for a vote of confidence in Boris Johnson? The voters of Southend may not have signalled that that is quite what they want just yet, but Camp Sunak seem to. And the Chancellor's allies, well placed in the media and widely found among the masters and mistresses of the universe who run policy and effect government in the unelected shadows of our democracy, are well into it. The Spads and their friends in the media are fully engaged. What a way to run a country. Labour want him out. That's not only their right, it's their job. For the media and for partisan advisers, it is not. The job of the media is to report objectively the facts, not lobby for a particular narrative, let alone one or the other outcome. The job of Spads is to advise and guide ministers. Lobbying for a new boss, and presumably a new job with a new boss, is not. I'm delighted to be joined live in the studio by Lady Victoria Bothick, former Deputy Mayor to Boris Johnson, who campaigned for Anna Firth, the successful Tory candidate in that by-election. Come to some of the murky stuff in a moment. But first of all, did the scale of that protest surprise you as much as it did me?
I'm a supporter of Anna Firth. She's a great local candidate. Obviously, she went to school in Southend. She was a great choice. She's a barrister. And I think the important thing is that she really respected and wants to pay tribute to Sir David, as she made very clear in her acceptance speech. I think he was, obviously having served as a Member of Parliament, we know that he was a fantastic MP, respected by so many, even if they wouldn't have been natural Conservatives. Yeah. And I think she wants to build on that legacy and, of course, build on the exciting news that in the Queen's Jubilee year, Southend is going to be a city. And so I think the important point is the people voted with their feet. They came out, as you said yourself. They could have voted for anybody, but they voted for Anna because they wanted to continue the work that was going on, and they were happy to support Conservatives.
With glee or through gritted teeth? What were they telling you on the ground?
Certainly, people were quite prepared to go and vote Conservative. I think the point is that, as you say, there's been this absolute furore created about, a place of work, i.e. Downing Street. They were at work, you were at work. Yes, a few drinks in the garden. Yes, the boss had a birthday and we all shared a cake. I don't think that's what really matters to the people of Southend West, and I don't think that probably matters in most of the households tonight. Yes, of course, the Prime Minister has accepted the sacrifices that people made. As he said himself, he apologised, and after all, he's a COVID sufferer himself, so he knows how dreadful this disease is. But I think the important point is he said he's going to make changes. He's accepted that he needed to refresh his team. And obviously, we've started to see that today. But of course, he has still got some very loyal people working for him, Baroness Finn, Ben Gascoigne, who worked with me and him, and obviously Boris at City Hall.
And Finn worked with Cameron, didn't he?
That's right. So there are a lot of loyal people there, and I've no doubt Boris will continue to make changes, as he said today, about involving the MPs.
We have known each other for a long time, and you are an extremely honest woman. So those concerns that you do hear, because I know you do, you must hear some, we all do.
Yes.
Are they about personality and character, or are they about policy, spending, tax, green?
People are fussed about what matters to them. During the COVID, I've been working in a food bank, so I've seen for myself every single day, fetching, delivering, collecting food, distributing food, and listening. And that's the same job as listening on the doorsteps in Southend. People are much more worried about the things that connect their day-to-day life. As you say, what's going to happen? For the basic things, are their bins going to be collected? But more importantly, the cost of living, as you said, the cost of heating, the worry about what is coming along. But also, they're much more interested, quite interestingly, on the international situation. And I think that's, people say, well, let's get him back focused on running the country as a whole. And, Boris will get a strong team around him, a loyal team. And then I think we will start to see the Boris that many of us know well, the Boris that wants investment in this country, that wants to go on investing in education, in the NHS, in police. And then we'll see the Boris that we all voted for.
Two people at the heart of this. Munira Mirza, who you worked with in that previous existence when she too worked for Mr Johnson in City Hall in London, and Dominic Cummings. Neither of them are even members of the Conservative Party, and yet both of them have until recently been at the pounding heart of a Conservative government with the biggest majority in living memory.
Well, I think Boris is obviously trying to take a range of opinions, and now we see where it's taken him.
Did he get that wrong?
I think he was extremely keen to listen to Munira because she did bring a different perspective.
Did he get it wrong?
I wouldn't say that Boris got it wrong. I think it was right for him to take a range of opinions. And certainly Munira was a very trusted part of the team at City Hall. I'm sure she has played a valuable role.
The most common criticism that I hear from folk, friends of mine who are Conservatives, but also across a wide spectrum, because I try and chat to as many folk as I possibly can, is that basically he isn't really a Tory himself anymore. He was originally, that's how he began, but he's become a high-spend, high-tax, carbon-zero, tree-hugging man. And many people point the finger of blame for that at his good lady wife, at Munira, and even at Dominic.
I think in the heart of it, Boris wants people to be successful. He wants to empower people to be successful. But I think, as you say, there's been a lot of pressures during COVID. After all, it's not just here. And I mean, they fought through COVID. We know the vaccination programme. I was listening to Lord Darzi yesterday, and he's giving outstanding work on the amazing work that's happened with the vaccines and the medical discoveries here, and how the result of that will probably mean many more vaccines, many more wonderful high-tech, med-tech things coming along our way here in Britain. And we've got the freedom to do that now. And I think, we've got to start, looking forward, looking at the positives, making the best of it. And that's where Boris is very good. He'll get an idea and he'll build on it and he'll want to make something work. And I think, yes, he has suffered during COVID. Yes, everybody has. And, it's given everybody a rethink as to, what's happening here.
Do you think when these stories first broke about parties and bagfuls of booze and all the rest of it, don't want to bore on about it because everybody out there knows about it and they're either keen on it or they're bored rigid with it, that the Boris that you know best would have wanted instinctively to say, yep, did much of that, yep, sorry, big mistake, error, move on, terribly sorry, in that Borisonian way.
I think
and then again, advisers was, you can't do that, you can't say that, so began to spin, what essentially is a spider's web of lies.
I think you're quite right. Boris would have said, I think the problem is when he would have gone out, he wouldn't have thought that it was his role to supervise people and micromanage. Boris isn't a micromanager. He puts you there to get on with your job and get on with it.
I suspect also what I know of him, and you know much, much more, is he wouldn't also have seen it as his job to say you mustn't do that.
No, absolutely.
He'd go, odd thing to do.
No, exactly. I think the point is that there was a place of work. So people go into the garden and have a beer at the end of the day. There was a drinking culture. All of that's been criticised. I've worked in places where there is a drinking culture. I've also worked for places where there's absolutely no drinking culture. And I think the problem is that's obviously the system here. And they all put into a kitty and they had a drink at the end of the week in the garden. Yeah. And sometimes Boris would have joined them.
All right, final couple of minutes, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, but it has to be that because we have lots of other lovely folk to chat to. 2 points. One is, do you understand when people like Sir Malcolm Rifkin say what they say from the old school, as it were? Answer to that, I suspect, is yes. But do you equally understand what the new intake are up to with these letters calling for votes of no confidence and basically turning on the leader of the party at this juncture? Do you understand that?
I think it's extraordinary that those people are there because of the majority that Boris won. And if we can get Boris back to his full fighting strength, batting for this country, investing in this country, delivering on the agenda that he promised, then I think we'll see, as truly rising as a phoenix from the awful tragedy of COVID that the Prime Minister's apologized. And he said, work starts today, work starts now. And I think that's what we have to see over the next few weeks. We have to give him the next few weeks to see how he's going to build back better, and that's what we need to have Boris do.
And the final question is purely character, nothing to do with tax, spend, policy, anything of that nature. Do you believe that he, as a man, can change his ways if they are perceived to be not as focused as they ought to be, and genuinely make a fresh start? Or will he shrug that off as being nobody's business at all, and I'm going to roll the dice again?
I think that Boris wants to make a success of this role. He's always wanted to be Prime Minister, as we know. And he'll want to go down in history as a good and excellent Prime Minister with a great legacy. So let's give him that opportunity to build that legacy.
Victoria, great to see you again. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Lovely
No
to
problem
talk
at
to you.
all. Thank you.
So, Lady Victoria. Victoria just lost her peeress. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Joining me now, another good friend of mine, and I hope was able to listen to much of what we said there, Trevor Kavanagh, the political columnist for the Sun newspaper. Trev, good to see you. Southend West was a chance to make a protest. Did the scale of that protest surprise you?
Well, frankly, Alistair, nothing surprises me anymore. In the last few weeks, we've seen, both of us, actions and events which would never have happened even a few years ago. And I thought that the points you made in that interview were very appropriate, that Boris has suddenly been caught short. I think that the drinks parties have really angered people across all parties who stuck by the rules, often with very sad and in some cases tragic circumstances, while there were things going on in Downing Street which were basically unacceptable. And then suddenly people started looking at other things, the looming cost of living crisis, the price we're paying in green levies, the fact that we haven't done any fracking, which would have delivered cheap fuel instead of having to pay for very expensive imported fuel. In fact, we could have Europe's cheapest fuel, cheapest gas and cheapest oil had we done something about fracking instead of bowing to the green lobbies. So all of a sudden, the whole track record of Boris on Brexit, delivery on Brexit, the deregulation, the failure to deal with immigration, and the fact that nothing has been done in that 2-year period. Okay, we did have the pandemic, but other ministers could have been surely doing something about free ports, for instance. And suddenly all of this is brought to bear just as we plunge into this cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
And so basically it's all come in one load.
Yeah. Do you sense also that in terms of its scale and its potency, there is a conspiracy, as that tweet I read out, that, you know, Munira knows James through her husband, James knows Rishi because they were at school together, and it goes on forever and ever and involves senior figures in the television media and Allegra and that whole game. Is there basically a conspiracy to get rid of Boris, either because he's done the job on Brexit or because he did the job on Brexit?
Well, I think that manoeuvring has been going on for quite a long time, longer than just the period of this Partygate. Way back in the party conference in October, it was quite clear that people were just waiting for an opportunity, and already Dominic Cummings had begun to unload his bucket loads over the Prime Minister and over Downing Street and over Carrie Johnson. So the rot had already begun to set in. I think we are now in a sort of conspiracy where people have decided that Boris is not going to last as Prime Minister, and that therefore their own futures rest with whoever follows. So the king is dead, long live the king. And as we speak, the likely new king is going to be Rishi Sunak, and you can see people just simply swarming in his direction.
And it's ironic, and I wanted to try and capture that thought in my monologue, in the sense of, if that is the case, and I suspect you're right, and I suspect I'm right as well, he had a god-awful day yesterday. I mean, neither side liked what he did on energy prices. He stood by that rise in national insurance, which both the left and the right of the Conservative Party don't like. The Governor of the Bank of England ups rates and warns of 7% inflation. If he topples Boris Johnson, that's not a king's crown I'd want to inherit.
And of course, we have all that left to go through. We have the local elections. We have the actual arrival of those increases in national insurance contributions. We have the continuing soaring of inflation and real belt tightening going on in the households of people who are the working class Conservative support base. And I mean, what we don't know is where we stand with Rishi on certain subjects. On the European Union, although he is a Brexiteer, it is understood that he was against certain measures like deregulation and the Northern Ireland Protocol because it might trigger a trade war with the European Union, that he was against these free ports for similar reasons. And we don't know where he would stand, for instance, on the green issues, whether he would reopen fracking and let the oil companies begin to exploit those huge oil fields in the North Sea. And what about, well, there are a lot of other policies that we need to find where Rishi Sunak stands, and I'm not sure we do know yet.
No. You always share with me what you hold to be the huge importance of what your readers say and what they think, and they write to you in the old-fashioned way. They also inundate you with emails and what have you. Do you sense, as I do, that the political, journalistic elite have got one view of this crisis, but ordinary folk you bump into out there, despite what the polls say, take an entirely different view? I mean, it may be that there are a lot of GB News viewers, Sun readers, or just folk who take to Twitter, but I'm not getting from ordinary folk this sense of meltdown, demise, it's all over and he's a wrong 'un.
It's very interesting, Alistair, that you should say that, because when I have written articles which are critical of Boris and saying that basically by neglect or benign failure of discipline, he has brought this on his own head, there is resounding silence from readers. They don't really want to hear this about Boris. They like him. He's a very likeable chap. And I mean, throughout the entire period of his premiership, whenever he's appeared in public and people are present, it doesn't matter where it is or who they are, whether they're Labour voters or Tory voters, they just swarm towards him. He's a magnet. And people simply like him, and I like him, and you like him. People who know him personally, people who are now calling for him to go, actually like him as a person. He's very likable as a politician and as a person, and that's why, in part, he won that 80-seat landslide.
Let me put another question to you that I put to Victoria, which I've thought really long and hard about. This thing about a charismatic natural leader surrounded by advisors, some of the most senior, not even being members of the Conservative Party. But that Boris Johnson that you and I have known for so long, when somebody pointed out about evidence of there having been parties and knees up and him attending them and this, that and the other, instinctively he would have wanted to say, yes, I did, yep, probably a bit of a misjudgment, sorry about that, shrug, move on, and hope to get away with it, which he might have done. It was the cover-up, which must have been advised to him by other folk, that could be, and maybe is, his undoing. That was counter-instinctive for Boris Johnson.
I'm not 100% sure of that, because he does have a policy of never apologising, because he thinks that the fracas will disappear with time and everyone will move on and literally forget it, and that's exactly what has happened in the past. Doesn't matter what sort of explosions and eruptions have taken place, people forgive him and forget it. I think what's happened here is that the Partygate issue, in which people have been found to feel like they've been made fools of, that they followed the line, they followed the rules, they were obeying the law, while in Downing Street, whether Boris was actually at those parties or not, it was under his roof that night after night, drinking was going on, maybe after a long week's work, but nonetheless, it was going on against the rules, and now the police are looking at it. So that means that they're looking askance at other things that I suspect they wouldn't have done in normal circumstances. But in the process of that, they have suddenly discovered that 2 years have passed and all sorts of things that were promised after Brexit have not been delivered. And indeed, the government has gone down a direction that they didn't vote for, which is this green crap, if we can call it that. I mean, when we're sitting on oceans of gas and oil, but heading for a cost of living crisis, which is largely due to the fact that we're paying through the nose for imported oil, held to ransom by the Russians in the process, people simply can't make sense of that. When they have to fill their tanks with basically £20 notes worth of petrol, it begins to hit home. And people are going to seriously have to cut their costs and pull their belts in And this isn't what they expected from Boris Johnson.
Yeah. And add to that, I was talking to John Redwood on the programme a week ago on the national insurance rise, when public sector borrowing requirement was 13 billion lower than expected. You do not need this year right now, come spring, to be raising national insurance. But there, I think we're agreed on that. The final question, and not an attempt to be clever or playing chess or anything, it's a genuine question. Do you think that his enemies intended it to be as long and drawn out an assassination attempt, or in truth, is it proving a heck of a lot trickier than they thought it was going to?
Well, I think it is simply because of what you just raised, the popularity of Boris outside. And there was a period when the polls, which had gone so badly for the Tories, suddenly began to go into reverse, and the gap between the Tories and Labour narrowed by 50%. This caught a lot of people by surprise. And of course, then you get more leaks coming out, presumably from Dominic Cummings, who is determined to destroy this Prime Minister. And we went back to square one. So for every step forward he makes, it's 2 steps back because of the circumstances that then erupt under his feet. So I think it has taken longer. He isn't going to go willingly. He will have to be dragged kicking and screaming out of Downing Street. And at this stage, they haven't quite got the appetite to kill him as Prime Minister, and they aren't 100% sure who they want to replace him.
Fascinating stuff. Trevor, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for breaking into your Friday evening to spend time talking
always a pleasure.
About all these matters. Great to see you. Take care. See you soon, I hope. The great Trevor Kavanagh there, the political analyst for the Sun newspaper. After the break, much referred to in both of those conversations, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, pledges support to families as energy bills soar. But is it enough?
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Yesterday, as we either pulled our hair out in disbelief or sighed with resignation over yet more Partygate shenanigans, other matters were afoot. On a torrid Thursday, Ofgem unveiled the new cap on domestic energy prices, up more than 50% from the 1st of April. For most of the 22 million homes affected, it means an increase of £693 from £1,277 to £1,971 a year. Prepayment customers face an increase of £708 to £2,017 a year. Now, Ofgem, like pretty well everybody else, blamed the increase on the global rise in global gas prices over the last 6 months. Wholesale prices quadrupled last year. Now, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, found another £9 billion to ease the pain, announcing a £200 discount off bills in October, but the money would be clawed back at the rate of £40 a year from 2023. There's also a £150 rebate from council tax bills, but only in homes from bands A to D. What he didn't do was cut VAT on energy or hit the energy companies with a windfall tax on the huge profits that they made last year. Critics of Mr. Sunak said he'd helped the rich more than they needed and the poor less than they needed. And it was a case of robbing Peter to pay Peter, only to ask Peter to pay it back in the end. Then along came the Bank of England, doubling interest rates to 0.5%. Yeah, peanuts, I know, but nasty if it gets caught in your cost of living throat. And despite rampant inflation, the Governor, Andrew Bailey, called on folk to curb their pay ambitions to help see off inflation that's heading for 7% in the near future. Well, the Prime Minister hit that one out of the park today. His spokesman said, and I quote, "We obviously want a high-growth economy and we want people's wages to increase. We recognise the challenge of the economic picture which the government set out, but it's not up to the government to set wages or advise the strategic direction or management of private companies," close quote. So there you go. Is enough being done to wrestle with the cost of living crisis, and is what is being done the right thing to do? First, some background from our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis. He's in Nottinghamshire with a view of what it's like for some just trying to make ends meet.
Every day, Sandra delivers emergency food parcels across Sutton in Ashfield, where rising costs are driving more people into poverty.
We're seeing when people come to the door with multi-layers of clothing, they can be wearing thick coats, I've seen one wearing gloves, and they're quite anxious about how the situation is going to escalate when the fuel prices go up.
On streets like this, cold homes aren't uncommon. Some choose between heating and eating.
Are you able to put your heating on at the minute?
Lisa is on disability benefits. The mum of two has fibromyalgia, a painful condition that means she can't work. She's seen her energy bill spike, affecting everyday decisions.
My young lad, he always says, "Mum, can my friend come round to play on the Xbox?" And I tend to have to check the electric and say, "Oh, no, I've only got £5 left. That's got to last us till tomorrow, so your friend can't come round." Or in regards to the heating, if it's absolutely freezing and we've only got a few quid left on the gas, it's a case of just pulling the froze over you and chilling out with the froze, or dressing gown. I tend to live in my dressing gown so I don't get cold.
Yesterday, the energy regulator Ofgem announced a price cap rise of 54%, nearly £2,000 for the average person. Spiralling fuel costs globally are to blame. Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced measures to try to manage the damage, a £200 energy discount plus a tax rebate for many.
We're going to give people a £150 council tax rebate to help with the cost of energy in April, and this discount won't need to be repaid.
Critics say the support does too little too late. Here in Ashfield, 1 in 3 families are living on universal credit, and so any change in the cost of their living can be quite difficult. And so a lot of people are having to make really tricky decisions about how they spend their money. Back at the food bank, Sandra has another parcel to prepare. The local college set up the service when the pandemic began. Tutors know who it is that needs help. Sometimes they face the same problems themselves.
Electricity plays a big part. I mean, what child doesn't love to sit and watch telly and, I don't know, have all the lights on every time he goes around the house? So it's quite worrying that you've got to be watching those little things that the children do all the time. But you have to be mindful of how much it's going to be costing at the minute.
Winter may soon end, but the cost of living crisis has barely begun. Will Hollis for GB News in the East Midlands.
Well, joining me now is Danielle Boxall of the Taxpayers Alliance. Danielle, that film demonstrated real poverty. That many on universal credit and or attending food banks speaks to a much bigger problem than energy prices, which we will come to in just a moment. But it just is appalling. UK 2022.
Yeah, it's really shocking. And, Theresa May mentioned a few years ago that just about managing as well. I think there's going to be a lot more people in that situation when they are really just about managing. I mean, we're seeing a tax burden that is going to be at a 73-year high going into the next election. So this is really hitting people's wallets hard. And it means that their budgets are squeezed. There's not much money for people to choose between heating and eating, as they mentioned in that film there. So, yeah, it's quite worrying, actually, that, we're living in 2022, but people are really struggling with the amount of money that they have.
Absolutely. Well, let's cut to the chase then on what I set up this conversation for and what I want to talk about, and that is precisely the cost of living and what Rishi Sunak did with taxpayers' money, as you always like to underline, and so too do I. How do you rate the package from yesterday on energy prices?
Yes, well, I think it is a bit misleading, really, because it's sort of giving with one hand and then taking away with the other. I mean, I know you mentioned this earlier, but, this sort of rebate that they've called it is actually just a loan, really. The £200 that they're giving to reduce the cost of energy bills is going to have to be paid back at some time. And it's sort of it's hedging basically on the bet that energy prices will go down in the medium term, which is quite risky, really, because going into the next election, prices might not fall and taxpayers are going to be having to pay back this loan that they've been given and also having to deal with rising energy prices at the same time. So it's quite a political, risky move for the Chancellor.
Yeah, Ofgem have warned today that they may well come back in 3 months' time rather than their normal 6 months, and are already giving out warnings that it may be that direction rather than that direction. So I hear what you say and I bank that. On national insurance as well, which I feel very strongly about. I mean, if it is necessary, it shouldn't be done now. If you want 12 billion, then borrowing was 13 billion lower in December than it needed to be. And it does cost employers. Do you begin to understand why a Tory Chancellor of the Exchequer is insisting on doing that?
Well, it's quite mad, really, isn't it? And, you meant this package that the Chancellor announced yesterday, the total figure for that is going to be about £9 billion. So he's giving out £9 billion, but then in April he wants another £12 billion, which is the cost of the national insurance increase. He's going to take that back. So why not just scrap the national insurance increase? And that would really help with the cost of living for people up and down the country. And I think that should be what the Chancellor is doing. It seems that this sort of giving with one hand, taking with the other, the only person that's really helping are the bureaucrats that are administrating all these complex changes and up and downs that we're seeing in the tax system at the moment. Yeah. And it's very worrying. We're having a system where we're impeding growth by, as you mentioned, taxing employers and employees. So that's going to impede growth in the long term. Whilst we're having big spending pledges and high taxes, it's a very shocking sort of combination from a Conservative Chancellor.
My high point of today was the Prime Minister's spokesperson countering what the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday on pay, because my kind of economy is one where people work very hard, increase productivity and earn as much as they possibly can. And that seemed to me to be what the Prime Minister, First Lord of the Treasury, was saying to the Governor of the Bank of England and indirectly to his Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, yeah, it's interesting what the Governor of the Bank of England was saying earlier. I mean, he is right, wage growth does increase inflation, but we've got to remember that public sector wage growth is part of that as well. So the government does have a hand in it too. But yes, I do think it's up to businesses to decide what their staff salaries are, not the government or the Bank of England. So the Bank of England coming in on this was quite bizarre, really. And I think the government and Boris they were right to sort of, question this. And it is quite alarming, really, that the Governor of the Bank of England would say something like that. But yes, I do think the best way to go ahead would be by cutting the national insurance increase, scrapping it altogether, and that would encourage growth, and that would also help inflation as well. So, I think there's definitely things that both sides could be doing to help that in the long term.
Final point, and reminding folk listening to our conversation that you speak for the Taxpayers' Alliance. Do you sense, as I do occasionally, that there is a real head of steam building up amongst folk who work as hard as they can and willingly pay their taxes at having to keep heaping money under a Conservative government, whether it's like universal credit that we spoke about at the very beginning of our conversation, or schemes that appear both to you and to me on energy prices to be half-baked? Are taxpayers getting cross?
Yeah, I think they are, and rightly so. I mean, the Bank of England yesterday, when they announced the rate increase, they also said that British households were seeing a decline in living standards not seen for a generation. So that's really shocking, and we saw it in that package earlier that people are really struggling right now. And we even released on Monday that the average lifetime tax for a family is over £1 million. That is a shocking amount of money. And what people could do with that amount of money is absolutely astonishing. But when you think that this isn't actually going to go down anytime soon, it's only going to increase by the time of the next election, I think, taxpayers have every right to be angry.
Danielle Boxall, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for breaking into your evening to talk to me, and I hope the rest of it is pleasurable and fruitful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Danielle Boxall there from the Taxpayers Alliance. After the break, we stick with the business theme, but with a twist. How is the political crisis in Northern Ireland affecting the business community in Northern Ireland? Stay with me.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. The resignation of Paul Givan as Northern Ireland's First Minister's added to the political crisis in the province. It follows the decision by Edwin Poots, the Agriculture Minister, to end checks on goods entering the country from the rest of the United Kingdom. It also further jeopardises the Brexit Northern Ireland Protocol and risks a total breakdown between the EU and the UK. The DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, said yesterday it represents an existential threat to the future of Northern Ireland's place within the Union, and by that he means the United Kingdom, not the Union in Europe. Ireland's Foreign Minister said that it put the UK in breach of international law. But today, it was ruled by a High Court judge that the Agriculture Minister's decision should be suspended. An anonymous member of Sinn Féin and another individual prompted a legal challenge, with Mr Justice Colton confirming that inspections must continue pending the outcome of a judicial review. But what's it feel like on the ground with all that confusion and all of that political rubbing up and down going on? What's it like in the business community? Delighted to be joined now by Bob MacDonald from Burham Balsamins. Is that correct pronunciation first, Bob?
Pretty close. Burn balsamics.
Yeah, balsamic vinegar, isn't it?
It is. We take a range and infuse and do some stuff with it to create a number of different products.
Brilliant. And I'm a huge fan. I have to put that on the record before we start the conversation in case I'm partisan, but I'm not at all. My first question, straightforwardly, is what has it been like, before all of the shenanigans of the last 36 hours, what's it actually been like as a business person with the group of people that work with you and for you under that border check regime, both as an importer of raw materials and an exporter of finished product?
We have actually been fairly well sorted with our dealings, sending back and receiving in. Once you get to grips with the sort of paperwork that's required, it still seems slightly strange to have to fill paperwork out essentially to send stuff within your own country. But that given, if you're a small producer, you've got to get on and get at it and make it happen. So you do that, and there is people there to help you, but it's a slightly strange scenario, as I say, sending paperwork to accompany a product coming from, in essence, your own country into your own country, albeit certainly a different part of it with a bit of water in between.
Yeah. So in essence, no problem. Business goes on, and you are doing very well. And I know that the good folks south of the border are happy to pay a premium for your product. It's so good. But here's a thought. I was chatting to one or two friends of mine who are business people, and they said, "I'll tell you what. I bet you they feel in Northern Ireland. It's the political shenanigans that's more destabilising than the actual border control regulations."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a sort of catch-22. If one says yes, the other one almost seems obliged to say no. So you never really move anywhere. And the unfortunate thing is, the people making those decisions it doesn't really affect them. It affects the people like us who are trying to employ people, keep people's mortgages up to date. Anything that jeopardizes that has an impact, and we try to stabilize that to ensure good welfare with the staff. Talk to them, keep them informed, get them excited about what we're doing, where we're trying to be, and we solve a lot of the problems that way.
Do you chat as well amongst colleagues who aren't in the food sector, but other manufacturers? Because there's a lot of fine industry in Northern Ireland, and there's some very high-tech stuff as well as hardcore engineering. Within the community that you are a leading light in, is there nervousness, is there concern, or is that famous Northern Irish capacity to shrug your shoulders and just get on with it ruling the day?
I think you've hit the nail right in the head. I'm sure deep down there's a lot of concerns.
Yeah.
But does that manifest? No, it is very much get up and get on with it and try and make it happen. But I'm sure, I know we've had a few sleepless nights wondering about how we would progress if they changed it further. And I'm sure many businessmen are the same. All you're trying to do is, we make some fantastic products in this country, get them to a wider market. Don't hamper us from doing that. Quite the opposite. Try and help us, try and encourage, because when you keep it local, the economy thrives.
Yeah. Do you feel that the political class talk to you guys and gals enough? I mean, you've got Mr. Poots and you've got Mr. Given, who's now resigned today. You've also got a Northern Ireland secretary based in Westminster. And the whole gang across in Brussels. Do they actually bother to pick up the phone to you people and say, what can we do that might help?
Rarely. Sometimes, if you go and do a show, they will tread the boards, get the photographs, come and speak to you. Are they really listening? I'm not so sure. They do what they have to do. Get onto the newspapers, get their pictures taken with local producers. How much difference would it be if I said something? Not an awful lot, I suspect.
Oh, that they would learn here, there and everywhere. Bob, I genuinely wish you well. I have a feeling that you're one of those who will get through it all and survive and keep producing your brilliant products, which I look forward to splashing all over an avocado or a lovely crispy lettuce as soon as possible. Thank you for finding time to talk to us this evening. That's Bob McDonald from Burren Balsamics. Thank you very much indeed. Now, very significant change in tone now, because that Northern Ireland is a very serious heavyweight stuff, but Bob brought a lovely smile and a positivism to it. The next story is more concerning. It's the Winter Olympics, and they began with the opening ceremony this morning, but as with the build-up, it was again surrounded by negative commentary, for a very good reason. China's human rights record against the province's Uyghur Muslim population has led some countries to declare diplomatic boycotts of the Games, which means that their top officials simply won't attend. For example, in our case, Princess Anne herself, a former Olympian who is also president of the British Olympic Association and a member of the International Olympic Committee, is not in attendance. She had to wish Team GB well with this video message.
President, I'd like to wish you every success for the Beijing 2022 Olympic Winter Games. I remember from my own Olympic career, everyone experiences their own levels of anticipation and excitement of stepping onto the Olympic stage. I know that you have all worked incredibly hard for this moment, overcoming the additional hurdles during these most challenging of times, and that you will do everything possible to make the nation and yourselves proud. Enjoy the experience and good luck.
Well, the United Kingdom, United States and Canada declared a diplomatic boycott, along with Australia, Lithuania, Kosovo, Belgium, Denmark and Estonia. They've all sent athletes, but no ministers or officials are in attendance. India sent a 6-member contingent to the Games, which included lone athlete Arif Khan. On the eve of the Games, the country joined the diplomatic boycott after China included a soldier who was involved in a deadly border skirmish with Indian troops in the torch relay. So the Games are underway, but it is a very tricky time. Joining me now is Yachu Wan, and there she is in New York. She's the senior China researcher at the Human Rights Watch. Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. That was a thumbnail sketch of who's going, who's not going, and the Princess Royal sending a video message. What's your take tonight? Are you disappointed at the international response?
Well, I'm encouraged by the countries that say, you know, we're not sending our top officials to the game. I'm disappointed there are still many top officials from various countries decide to go.
Who do you point the finger of blame at? Anyone in particular? Because, I mean, it has to be a free choice for these countries, but you lobby them, many other people lobby them. Do you feel there are people who have argued succinctly against it or are just ignoring you?
Well, for example, we don't think the United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres should go because terrible, terrible things are happening in China. It's crime against humanity in Xinjiang, and 1 million Uyghurs are being imprisoned in those camps. People are being subjected to torture, imprisonment, forced sterilization, forced abortion. So the Chinese government is using the game to legitimize its policies. Any, international dignitaries should stay away from the game, including the head of the UN. But, he's there and he delivered his speech to congratulate the games.
Yeah. My son writes about football and his company have written about what is called sports washing, particularly in the Middle East. And F1, which is my big sport, is also accused of it. Do you think that Beijing 2020 is an example of sports washing?
Absolutely, absolutely, no doubt. I mean, the Chinese government is using the game to say, we hosted the 2008 game. It's the summer game. The same city is hosting the winter game because we can do both games in one city. Look how capable we are. We want to show you our governance model. It's the pandemic. We're still being able to deliver the game, how great we are. So that's the message. The whole thing is political. The whole thing is, the government is using the game to legitimize its policies, to showcase the country.
Yachu, good of you to join us live from New York, and I wish you well. Thank you very much indeed. And for those of you who doubt what she was saying, just see the pictures of Putin and Xi glad-handing. That's it from me for tonight. Next up, it's Mark Dolan. See you again.
Good evening. This weekend will be windy for all and wintry for some, particularly across parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, we're more likely to see a mixture of rain, sleet and hail. This weather front introduced colder air. You'll have noticed that outside today. More weather fronts toppling in will reintroduce slightly milder air, but also bring some wet weather at times too.